title of this video is clickbait. Just putting it out there. But also, it's not, because honestly, I love WandaVision. But the reasons why I love it are probably not the reasons why most people love it. And despite my positive feelings about it, there's also plenty about the series that I absolutely despise. Maybe the reasons behind some of those impressions resonate with some of you, and maybe some of the arguments make you think I must be insane. So I guess the key word in the title is I. This is why I feel this way, and I have no way of guessing whether or not you guys feel the same way too. But this is the internet, and we're here to share ideas, even if some of those ideas make you go feral. I just want to start this video by saying that however I feel about this show doesn't invalidate how you feel about it. The things I personally dislike don't automatically make the series bad, and the stuff I love won't make it a masterpiece. If I dislike something, it doesn't mean I dislike the people who disagree with me, and it's also not an invitation to harass anyone who doesn't follow the same train of thought. Let's all just be nice to each other. I know sometimes that's a lot to ask of the internet, but I think it's worth a shot. With all of that said, let's finally take a look at the series that inspired so many conflicting emotions. I wanna talk about WandaVision. WandaVision is a series that was released in the Disney Plus platform following the adventures of two characters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, them being Wanda and Vision. They had both been previously introduced in other Marvel properties, and the audience is now given a chance to learn more about them. The show is presented as a sort of spoof on other eras of television, with each episode being, for the most part, set in a specific sitcom decade. The reasons for this are slowly revealed to the audience and are later tied into the conflicts of present-day agents trying to understand this phenomenon and stop the troubles that it is causing. I gotta start this discussion with the confession that I'm not exactly the best Marvel fan. I didn't read any comics, but I once cared a lot about the movies, and I went to watch them with my friends, and I would follow fan theories and other video essays about it. But over the years, my interests changed, and I shifted my attention towards other properties. I hadn't realized how much I had distanced myself from the MCU until the WandaVision series mentioned that Wanda's brother Pietro had died, and I became aware of the fact that I had forgotten about Pietro entirely. Like, to be fair, Age of Ultron wasn't exactly my favorite Avengers movie, and I haven't watched it ever since I first saw it in theaters, but I understand that me forgetting that the character existed is not the franchise's fault. So yeah, WandaVision isn't exactly made for me. I'm not the sort of Marvel fan that the higher-ups imagined when they created the show. I assumed they would have envisioned someone a little more involved with the storyline, or someone who was more invested in those specific characters, and I'm just not a perfect example of those things. But I also can't help but feel that WandaVision was made for me, specifically. Not because of whatever status I hold as a Marvel fan, but because the series is absolutely riddled with some of my favorite tropes in all of fiction. I love stories about robots with feelings, and Vision is a synthesoid, which I believe is Marvel for a cool robot. I love moments where a character seems to be in a trance or altered state of mind and they lose their memories, so another character has to try to bring them back to reality, and for the first few episodes, that's what seems to be happening to Wanda. I love it when characters are transported into a magical dimension that's just an unhealthy coping mechanism for dealing with trauma, which is what Westview is revealed to be. I love media that tries to replicate, parody, or comment on past eras of television, complete with all the aesthetic changes that come with the package. This all comes down to personal preference, and WandaVision just happened to tick all of the boxes of best tropes ever for me. If they added some found family and healthy queer relationships, there would be nothing else I could want out of the series. But I also need to recognize that this is not the point of the show. It's actually another MCU property that attempts to expand the Marvel world and develop some extra characters. It just so happens that it decided to do that using tropes and narrative elements that I am extremely fond of. In any case, part of the reason why I love those tropes so much is that I think they allow for some fascinating storytelling, and the narrative that WandaVision is trying to create is positively aided by all of those aspects. The other reason why I love those tropes is
I just think they're neat.
the biggest part of WandaVision's plot is dedicated to the adventures of the couple Wanda and Vision as they move into the small American town of Westview and try to live a normal life despite the fact that both of them have superpowers. Wanda can manipulate energy, making objects levitate and change appearance, as well as summoning them out of nowhere, and she can also control the minds of others. Vision is a cool robot who can phase through solid objects and disguise himself at will. Their shenanigans are presented through old sitcom formats, following them through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. Each episode of their lives brings situations where they are forced to hide their powers and assimilate into normal society, coming very close to being discovered but managing to get out of their predicament in the nick of time. It's formulaic, but that's the point. It's literally the premise of their sitcom. Each era of television is presented in a surprisingly faithful way, with differences in costumes, setting, framing, and any other stylistic choices you can think of. The way in which the story progresses also goes well with the decades they are trying to emulate. The complexity of their adventures increases as time goes on, requiring better sets, more elaborate special effects, and even leading to different character dynamics. The 50s episode, for example, brings us a very simplistic conundrum. Wanda and Vision must host a last-minute dinner party for Vision's boss and his wife, all while trying to conceal their powers. The whole thing can be shot in like 3 different sets and gives you an idea that the rest of the episodes would be equally conventional. As we move on into the 60s, we get a more complex problem, with Wanda and Vision needing to put on a talent show for the whole town. With the 70s, Wanda gets pregnant and the family starts expanding. The 80s brings us more kid-centric adventures, but we also step into couple squabble territory. When the 90s come around, we have way more stuff going on, with Wanda's children having their own side plot, and with a more nuanced dive into the relationship of the main couple, setting the conflict in a Halloween celebration that involves all of Westview. It feels as though this is a long-running sitcom that needed to reinvent itself along the decades, be it by adding more characters, exploring different sides of the marriage between Wanda and Vision, or increasing the scope of their adventures, as if they knew that the premise of having to hide the protagonist's powers from the world was enough for a simpler era of TV, but would feel way too small for more contemporary tastes. As we are consuming these era-specific sitcom episodes, we must also remember that they're not just a TV series. Within the world of WandaVision, they are an alternate reality created by Wanda as an attempt to deal with the grief of losing Vision, who died during the events of previous Marvel movies. Looking at the sitcom from this perspective, it gives us a fascinating opportunity to learn more about Wanda as a character. She has suffered through the loss of her parents, the radicalization and experimentation done by an in-universe extremist group, and the various experiences that came from joining the Avengers, culminating in the death of her partner. WandaVision, as in the sitcom she created, is the product of taking an entire town hostage and forcing its residents to live the scripted life she has planned for them in order to create an idyllic American town where she can live the happy suburban life of her dreams. Anything that happens in that sitcom is implied to be Wanda's doing. She controls where the characters go, how they act, what they say, and how the situation for each episode is set up and developed. Her goal was to create the perfect life where she and Vision got to raise a family and grow old together, since she was deprived of that in the real world. We later come to learn that she used to watch American sitcoms with her family as a young girl, and continued to turn to them for comfort in her adult life. A sitcom reality reminds her of that same happiness and safety, as well as working as a sort of promise that every conflict can be resolved and any damage isn't permanent. The sitcom itself is transmitted as energy waves to the rest of the world, who can take a look inside a Westview through a television screen. Wanda is the one manipulating what is transmitted, as if she decides the actions of every camera and edit, as well as when the opening and closing credits roll. And that setup raises some really interesting points. There are several scenes where something unnerving is happening, but the laugh track keeps playing, as if Wanda herself is trying to distract from what is painful and unsettling, laughing her own trauma away. Whenever something happens that she isn't satisfied with, she keeps it out of the shot or cuts it out entirely, declaring that there is no space in her world for anything but controlled perfection. And isn't it funny how even in Wanda's wildest dreams of a wonderful married life, she still puts herself in wacky situations where her powers are almost revealed? What does it say about her that she chooses to live on the verge of being discovered? Much like we can read Wanda's manipulation of the editing as a way of controlling what she couldn't control in real life, we can understand her tendency to rely on such plot lines as her way of acknowledging that her powers are a part of her, and that she gets to decide how and when they are revealed. Her television reality is a way of achieving her dreams of living a life free of uncertainties, threats, or unexpected mishaps. So, Westview is basically Pleasantville. Wait, I forgot no one's seen Pleasantville. Okay. Pleasantville was a 1994 movie about two teenagers that are transported into the world of a 50s sitcom. Everything seems flawless at first, but they soon realize that the only way to live a perfect life is to give up on ideas of self-expression and personal growth. And in order to allow themselves to change as people and improve the system they live by, they must reject the scripted life that has promised them an illusion of excellence. I made a whole video about it, so if you want a deeper analysis, click on the card and give it a watch. It's one of my favorite movies, and I'm telling you man, I just really like media that explores older eras of television. Wanda has created her own version of a perfect sitcom town where everything always goes according to plan. But in order to do that, she had to strip away the freedoms of every Westview citizen and force them to obey her commands. She believed that she was doing them a favor because she was creating a world that was as kind to them as it was to her, but she was unaware that by doing so, she was forcing them to share her grief. Her denial in accepting that the citizens hated to live like that mirrors her own refusal to deal with her trauma. Deep down, she is miserable and she knows it, but she is pushing those feelings away in the name of creating a perfect life. What she needs to understand is that perfection can only exist once it is scripted, and by that point, she is no longer living the life of her dreams. She is merely going through the motions of an automated routine. Even Vision starts to call her out for it. At first, he gladly plays along, but then he starts to realize that the rest of the town is suffering, no matter how his wife claims that they're doing fine. He has no memories aside from the ones that Wanda has granted him, as if there's a part of him that she is hiding. In creating the perfect couple life, she has also stripped him of his autonomy, and he needs to make her see that this is not okay. And I love that. I love this character journey. I love this setup. I love the aesthetic choices involved in making it work. I love everything about it. So why do I hate WandaVision? Well, I am reminded of why at the start of every episode. As much as I hate to admit it, WandaVision is, in fact, a Marvel series. Every time I forget about that, it's great. but every time the series makes me remember it, the cracks really start to show. Wanda's alternate reality sitcom is only half the plot of WandaVision. The other half is dedicated to the agents of a special organization trying to free the town of Westview from Wanda's control, and there's a bunch of side characters involved in this mission, some of which had already been introduced in other Marvel properties. Despite being part of the MCU, WandaVision doesn't really require you to watch the other 500 Marvel movies in order to understand everything that's going on. Wanda's and Vision's powers are established right from the start. There's a lot of exposition dialogue that's there just to remind the audience of what happened during whatever movie they're referencing, and the side characters stand out on their own even if you've never heard of them before. But WandaVision also really wants you to watch the other 500 Marvel movies. Not the ones that have already been released, but the ones that they are still going to make. By the end of the series, they have 2 post-credit sequences basically setting up other Marvel properties. And there's enough loose ends left throughout the show to create a dozen other movies if they wanted to. Take Monica Rambeau, for example. She is introduced as a girl in Captain Marvel and returns as an agent in WandaVision. She has suffered through the loss of her mother and thus empathizes with the pain that Wanda is carrying. There's this really interesting connection between the two. Monica is the only person who was able to enter Westview out of her own volition, and it is implied that Wanda trusts her more than she would trust any other citizen, probably because of their shared grief. Monica is so determined to help Wanda that she returns to Westview after being kicked out, knowing that it would permanently harm her, and in her struggle to push through the barrier, she ends up gaining superpowers. Even as the town declares that Wanda is a villain, Monica still takes her side, knowing that she would do the same if she were in Wanda's situation. And they barely do anything with those concepts. Monica spends a huge chunk of the finale being stuck inside the house of this other guy who is kind of Pietro, but of a different dimension, but also he isn't? It's not made entirely clear what is the true extent of his identity, or how he was forced into that situation, but it's just another loose end that I'm sure another Marvel movie or two will try to explain. When Monica finally breaks free, she rushes in to help Wanda's kids, who don't really need any help because they have powers of their own. After a very quick reunion, Wanda and her part ways, and then Monica gets a post-credit sequence where her next adventure is set up. I don't feel like we've learned anything new about Monica throughout this whole process. The Monica from her first introduction feels pretty much like the same character as she does in the finale. She is brave, determined, still coping with loss, but now she has superpowers. I like her character, but I don't feel like they do enough with her. WandaVision is just her superhero origin story. Her very long superhero origin story. From the way it's set up, it looks like Monica will help Wanda cope with grief. Wanda needs someone to connect with in the real world, and Monica seems awfully serious about becoming that person, returning to Westview just because she wants to ease Wanda's suffering. But by the end, none of this happens. Wanda still believes that she has no one, and Monica couldn't help her move on. The same goes for other characters, like Agent Jimmy Woo. He feels like the same guy in the finale as he did at the start, but he's been promoted now, I guess? Did he even learn anything? Or Darcy Lewis, who isn't even there for the final scene, so we don't get a proper send-off. I can't say these characters aren't explored at all, but it feels so underwhelming when compared to their potential. And all that stuff I said about how interesting it was that Wanda's idea of a perfect world still involved her getting into situations where her powers are almost uncovered? Yeah, apparently that's not true. It is stated that everything that went wrong during her sitcom episodes has been the work of recurring character Agnes, who is really a witch called Agatha Harkness. Out of all reveals in the show, this is the one that feels the most artificial. They claim that Agatha was behind it all, but we've seen the way that Wanda behaves when something goes out of her control. She drops the sitcom act, edits the anomaly out of the frame, expels the intruders from her town, and then goes back to acting like nothing ever happened. But when Agatha supposedly messed things up, Wanda just acted like it was part of the show. Like it was literally the setup for her sitcom. Attempting to retcon it and saying that it was Agatha all along weakens Wanda's character journey, which in my opinion was the highlight of the series. And from this point on, WandaVision just becomes a means to establish Wanda as the Scarlet Witch, which means she gets new powers and a costume change and becomes the setup for another Marvel movie. And after all is said and done, what does Wanda take from all this? Her sitcom can be seen as a way for her to cope with the loss of her loved ones, and it feels like she needs to learn that she can't hold on to a past illusion of perfection and needs to move on with her life. But by the end of the series, it looks like she's just trying to return to the same status quo, studying her new powers while being tormented by the voices of the kids that she plans on bringing back. There's no progression. It's just a Marvel property setting up a dozen others, which will go on to set up a dozen more. I started this video by saying that I'm not the best Marvel fan, because I distanced myself from the MCU along the years. So you could argue that the series just isn't meant for me. The things about it that upset me are just the stuff that attracts the real Marvel fans, so I should stop concerning myself with a show that was never trying to capture my interest. But the stuff that bothered me about WandaVision reminded me of why I let go of the MCU in the first place. There's only so many movies I can take of characters bickering at each other until I realize that they're not going anywhere. There's no end in sight. Their happy endings will be constantly kept out of reach just for the sake of dragging out their journeys for another movie or so. Whatever character development these heroes get is either insignificant or straight up non-existent. And at this point, it's so hard to think of Marvel and not remember other aspects of the franchise that are less than ideal, and I'm not the first one to point them out. Wanda's place in the comics as a Romani character has been completely overlooked by the story in a way that is clueless at best and insulting at worst. And this isn't the first time that Marvel has disrespected the cultures that it intends to depict. It's also very scary to think of how much Marvel means to mainstream culture and how Disney, the company that owns the franchise, is evolving into an ever-consuming monopoly that seems determined to kill off any chance of other creators making it in the industry. I wish WandaVision wasn't a Marvel series, but with the way things are, you're not gonna get greenlit unless you are one. It's ironic that a show so involved with the history and parody of TV sitcoms makes me question the state of the entertainment industry, and sometimes it's really hard to shut those voices down and just enjoy my silly show about a magical lady married to a cool robot. But even Marvel isn't all that bad. I loved Thor Ragnarok, and I believe its message is very much worth spreading. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies were also a good watch, and at the time they gave me the real impression that the characters were growing. Black Panther is very important for representation matters, yes, but it's also a really fun movie. A film or a company or a series doesn't have to be irredeemably bad, or so good it is beyond criticism. Most of the times, it can be both. And I think that pointing out what works and investigating why it's good can be just as valuable as thinking of what doesn't work and critically determining why. I hate WandaVision, but also, I love it. Just, can somebody make a series that is exactly like it, but that doesn't constantly remind me of the problems of the Marvel franchise? Until then, I guess this one will do. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. I spent a long time wondering whether or not I should make a video on WandaVision, and apparently I decided to make one, so I hope this decision doesn't come back to bite me. Can we all just be nice in the comment section? That would be pretty cool. You know what else is cool? My Patreons! Thank you so much for supporting me and helping me keep on making videos. If you would like to join the gang, click the link in the description. Share this video if you liked it, subscribe if you wish to see more cool stuff, and leave a like on your way out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! My favorite episode is the 80s one, and it's mostly because of this scene where Vision walks in looking like the most 80s computer dad ever.